Good morning, a very good morning to you. Welcome to my thought for the day. And we are in 1 Peter 3, the first verse, really. A controversial verse, if ever there was one. Likewise, you wives, be submissive to your husbands, so that some, though they do not obey the word, may be won without a word by the behaviour of their wives. I think submission is almost the most maligned word in the scriptures. Being submissive does not mean being a doormat. As a wife, recognising the order within the home is very, very important. It's the right way to do it. And we can fight it as much as we like, us women. We can fight it and say, well, I'm equal, and you are. We are equal to our husbands. There's nothing in Scripture that says a man is more important than a woman or of more value to God than a woman. We remember that the Scriptures were written at a time when it was a very male-dominated society, and it was very hard for women to live independently without the protection and provision of a man. It was a difficult situation. And we acknowledge lots of things like Jesus didn't pick any women in his choice of disciples. Well, it would have been a totally unacceptable thing in his day for that to happen. But there were many women who followed Jesus. Women were the first to hear of the resurrection. Their testimony was not believed by the disciples because their culture was that a woman couldn't bear witness in a court of law. Her word could not be taken in law against a man. These things were all in place at that time. But I think there is great wisdom in this verse, especially for those women whose husbands are not believers. If you married and you had your husband, and then you come to faith and your husband doesn't share your faith, what do you do? How do you behave? Well, here is the wonderful scriptural advice, which is do not worry about trying to get your husband saved. Simply live as a Christian in your home. Let your mind be transformed by the teachings of Scripture. And as you live your life, your testimony will save your husband. They may well be saved simply by seeing how you live, seeing the new attitudes that you have, the new attitude towards your husband of loving and providing and committing to your husband as much as possible. And when there is, you only need to submit when there is a dispute. You only need to give in to another person's decision making when you don't agree with the decision that's being made. You don't need to be submissive in any other situation. You need to be loving and honouring, mutually honouring, as verse 7 encourages husbands. We'll come to that in a couple of days' time, I suppose. But really, it's a bit like in any other circumstance. You don't need to know what your attitude is towards your husband until there is a dispute. And when there is a dispute, let the husband's word be taken and submit to his will. It's as simple as that. And it's not a problem. Mostly, if there is a problem, it's with our ego and our self that says, why should I? Why should it not be? And I'm right. And if you're right, time will prove that you're right. And hopefully it won't. You find as time goes on that none of these things are that important. But it's all about our will and our purpose. But just as we have submitted to Jesus, just as we have come to him, just as we've been called, just as we have determined to die to sin and live to righteousness, so we should determine to live our human lives according to the order that God has put in place. And that is an obedience thing. If you choose to obey Jesus, if you've committed yourself to obey him, there may well be times when he will ask you to do things that you don't want to do. And what do you do then? Do you submit to his will? Well, if you've given your life to Jesus, you do. You submit to his will. However hard it is and however much you dislike it, you have committed yourself to Jesus. He is the shepherd. He is the one who tells you where to go. He is the one who tells you, who instructs you. And the only time you need to test out whether you are fully submitted to Jesus, and this is for men as well as for women, is when what he asks you to do is not what you want to do. Then you have to submit. Submission is only proved to be real when it's hard to do. It's very easy to submit to someone or to something if it's not a problem and if you agree with everything they say. It's only when Jesus says something to you that you don't like and you have to decide, do I do that? Do I do that? Do I obey? It's very hard. It's very hard at times. And so it is in a marriage too. Very hard. But it says, likewise, you wives. So in the same way as we were straying once as sheep, and now we have returned to the shepherd. And the shepherd directs what we do and how we do it, and where we go, and who we go with. So we wives have that same attitude towards our husbands as we have towards Jesus. That when there's a dispute, when there's a difficulty, when there's something we don't agree with, we submit. Just like we do to Jesus. It's no different. It's not harder or easier. It's just the way it is. And the way of blessing is doing things God's way. That's the way of blessing. The path of blessing is to do things the way God has organized them and accept that God's wisdom is better than our cultural wisdom. It's not about being a doormat. It's not about never sharing your opinion. In a good marriage, the opinion, if you read the end of Proverbs 31, tells you all about a good wife. And she's not a doormat. She's running a business. She's proactive in lots of ways in her life. But if there ever came a point where she differed and disagreed with her husband, after talking it through, praying it through, the submission would be there, because that's the order that God has put things in. So, God bless you. Have a great day thinking about these things, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.